Your worth is 10 out of 10 right now, regardless of how you look, what you do, your academics, anything. You're worthy. You're good enough already. The problem being, though, is if we are codependents, and many of us are, if not all of us, in long-term relationships with narcissists, it's because we are seeking out somebody else to give us our sense of worth. And we know narcissists are very good at the start of the relationship in love bombing you and really saying and being and doing all of the things that are filling that hole in the soul. They're making you feel worthy. Do you ever feel like that your sense of worth is wrapped up in how other people act and behave around you? That you only actually feel good enough or worthy if other people around you are acting as such? If that sounds like you, because it was me too, then this is the podcast episode for you, where we're going to be talking about codependency and narcissistic abuse. Hi everybody, my name is Caroline Strawson. I'm the host of Trauma and Narcissism Redefined. And if you're new here, a massive, massive welcome. If you're a regular listener, then welcome back. This podcast is really dedicated to you guys. You know, I started this a number of years ago now. Would you believe we've had over 5.5 million downloads now? I have to pinch myself. It's kind of like little old me. So I'm super, super grateful. And, you know, these episodes are really about inspiring you, educating you, and helping you know you're not on your own. Because many of the episodes are really showcasing things I didn't know, experiences I have had, and learnings that I now know, having gone through extensive trauma training and being an expert in narcissism too. So huge welcome. So let's talk about codependency. And the reason why I wanted to do this podcast episode, and by the way, you can watch my episodes on YouTube as well if you fancy watching them. But I do apologise, my hair desperately needs a wash. I don't know about you guys, but if you know you're going to the hairdressers, and I know this is probably women in particular, I know I'm being a bit gender biased there, but if you know you're going to the hairdressers, you don't bother getting your hair washed, do you, for the few days beforehand? But mine desperately needs doing, and I've been using dry shampoo for the last 2 days. So apologies if I don't look sort of polished hairdo or anything. It's kind of like stuck to my head a little bit. But hey ho, we're all friends, right? So I wanted to do this one about codependency because I actually put a post out on Facebook yesterday. And that actual post says, and I'll read it to you with the image, codependency equals rejecting your own emotional guidance system for the sake of being guided externally, brackets, by other people, substances, or addictions. And I saw this meme and I thought, I need to do a post about that. And then with the comments, I thought, I need to do a podcast episode about this. Because I used to think codependency was something that we talked about with substance abuse, that codependency was someone who was addicted to, say, alcohol. That's what I thought codependency was. So when I came out of an abusive relationship, realized that he was a covert narcissist, and people were talking to me about, oh, you must be codependent then. I started to think, well, I'm not an alcoholic. And genuinely, that is what I thought. I didn't actually understand what codependency meant or the wider parameters of the meaning of that concept. And when I started to read actually about the concept of codependency, it all made a huge amount of sense. And I thought, yeah, you're right. I am highly codependent. So as I'm doing this podcast now, I would say I'm a recovered codependent, but we're always a work in progress. So what exactly is codependency, and why are codependents magnets to people like narcissists, toxic individuals? Why are we a magnet? Well, codependency is really where, for whatever reason in our childhood, we have learned that our sense of worth is not just who we are. It comes from a sense of a transactional element into this. And by that, I mean your worth is wrapped up in your grades, how you look, how you are at sport, for instance. It's not wrapped up in simply for who you are and breathing each and every day and you know what, that is good enough. It's wrapped up in something external. And this is where the problem starts to come in. If you're not taught by your parents and caregivers, and this isn't about slating, by the way, our parents and caregivers, at the end of the day, most of them are doing the best they can. Most of them. Obviously, there's some horrific experiences of clients that I work with too. But most parents are bumbling along. I mean, you may relate to that as a fellow parent yourself too, doing the best we can with the information we've been given. But as children, we're very egocentric. So when we're experiencing events and behaviours and other people, we will interpret that. We always like to have a story that goes with that and create a narrative as to the reason why that is happening. And for children, we don't have a cognitive capability to recognize it's because of the other person, maybe because of their past experiences. We always spin it round to ourselves. My parents are getting a divorce because I'm unlovable. I'm being neglected because I'm not worthy enough. So children will always internalize external experiences as a reflection of themselves. Now, as adults, we may look back and absolutely know that that is not the case. You know, we have more experience, we have more knowledge. So we can look back and say, I know I was neglected, but I also know that wasn't because I wasn't good enough. And we can know that. This is the work that I do, the knowing and the feeling. So we can know all of these things, yet our body still is holding the story and we're still feeling that we're not good enough. And this is the crux of a lot of healing. We know we're good enough. We know it's the other person and it's not us, but we feel a certain way. And that could be anxious, it could be angry, it could be sad. If we're in one of those survival responses, then in some way we're interpreting other people's behavior as a reflection of ourselves. So codependency is a real lack of self-worth, self-belief, self-esteem. We haven't learned that simply for being who we are good enough. So what that means is we are always looking externally for approval so that we can sit in a sense of worth. And that, for me, that was kind of my life. You know, I grew up with a highly codependent mother whose sense of worth very much came from being a mother. And obviously being the youngest of 3 girls, I was the one in the house left while my sisters were off at uni and they were a little bit older than me too. So I really felt a sense of responsibility to make my mum happy because that was her only sense of worth. So I had to be this perfect child. My father, on the other hand, was highly unemotional, no praise, no nothing. And my interpretation of that was, I'm not good enough. I need to do more and be more. And it very much became an academic side of that. And interestingly, my father is the same. You know, academics is very, very important to him. And he definitely thinks his worth is wrapped up in academics. And I definitely used to think my worth was wrapped up in academics too. You know, I'd get lots of really lovely compliments about how I looked as a child. And then moving into adulthood. And whilst that was nice to hear, I thought, well, it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter about that because I need to be clever. I need to get the academics. And that because I thought my worth was wrapped up in academics. And it's still something I have to work on in that scenario because I'm not a psychologist. You know, I'm not a psychologist. And sometimes I feel like maybe people in certain ways, particularly like mainstream TV sometimes, because I don't want to be a psychologist. I don't want to just talk about problems. I want to feel them and work from a somatic side, which is why then I've trained in lots of somatics like somatic experiencing, internal family systems, EMDR, brain spotting, breath work, cold water therapy, hypnotherapy. For me, these are the body-based therapies because that's what worked for me. I tried talking about all my problems, made me feel worse. So I needed to feel to have a completion of a response cycle, a survival response to move forward. So kind of coming back to the codependency piece then, if you are someone that always feels not good enough or not worthy, firstly, you need to check who you're surrounding yourself with. That's a really important one to remember because there's a meme out there that says, you know, before you diagnose yourself with depression, look at who you're surrounding yourself with. And my goodness, that is so true if you're in a narcissistic relationship, right? Because depression is really a freeze response. So, you know, you're often in freeze when you're in these long-term abusive relationships. So codependents then, like you, like me, if we've ended up in long-term relationships with toxic people, we have a lack of self-worth. We don't believe we're good enough simply for being who we are. We believe we're good enough for what we can do, how we can get other people to behave towards us. That then means we're good enough. And that is not true. Your worth is not on a spectrum. It's not like if you're this, then maybe you're 7 out of 10, good enough. Yeah, rubbish, irrelevant. Your worth is 10 out of 10 right now, regardless of how you look, what you do, your academics, anything. You're worthy. You're good enough already. The problem being, though, is if we are codependents, and many of us are, if not all of us, in long-term relationships with narcissists, it's because we are seeking out somebody else to give us our sense of worth. And we know narcissists are very good at the start of the relationship in love bombing you and really saying and being and doing all of the things that are filling that hole in the soul. They're making you feel worthy. It could be gift giving, saying the right words, whisking you away, whatever that may be, but they're making you feel worthy. And that feels good. It's a dopamine rush. They're saying the things that you've been waiting for. The problem being, though, with codependence in narcissistic relationships, at some point you'll push back, you'll ask a question, maybe a boundary will be ruptured or something, and you'll push back. And the narcissist will then behave in a certain way, might shout at you, give you the silent treatment, whatever that may be. That then to you is like a trigger to your core wound of not feeling good enough because your partner then is acting a certain way. That must mean I'm not good enough. So that then elicits a survival response in our body. We start to pump out cortisol. And that in the long run, if we keep on pumping out cortisol, can lead to chronic illness. That's why we see many, many people, and I see this in my community, suffering with chronic illness, fibromyalgia, autoimmune disorders, skin conditions, because our body is inflamed by pumping out the cortisol. And we're so focused on survival in these relationships that the systems in our body, it's like, yeah, we'll get round to that. Because as human beings, we're built for survival. That is the priority, not the healthy homeostasis of our systems either. So codependency is really that lack of self and seeking others to give us that sense of worth. And for me, I even look and think, even if my kids used to get in the car, this was when they were much, much younger and before I did a lot of obviously my own inner work, they'd get in the car if I picked them up from school. And if they weren't happy, that was a trigger to me. I'm not good enough. I need to make them happy. I need to make sure they live in a world of pink fluffy clouds. Because if they weren't happy, I wasn't a good enough mum. And that was like ripping the scab off a core wound of not feeling good enough as a person, because I was never taught that. I was never taught growing up that simply for being Caroline, nothing transactional was good enough. Maybe you can relate to this. This isn't saying all parents are bad, by the way. And that doesn't mean if you're recreating that codependency in your own children, you're still doing the best you can. But it's about awareness and then intention of changing that. You know, I started parenting my children very codependently because I was in this narcissistic relationship with my ex. And my only sense of worth, because I'd given up work, was the same as my mother, being a mum. But that was putting a lot of pressure on my children then, because for them then they had to behave and act a certain way and be happy, because then I was happy because I was good enough. Too much pressure. So we want to break this cycle. And it starts with you. You've got to start to realize that you are good enough simply for being who you are. And this is when we have to start to work from a nervous system perspective to go back and have corrective experiences. You know, our brain doesn't recognize if something happened yesterday or 20 years ago, as long as it's had a corrective experience and it can timestamp all of these events and interpretations into the past. So you don't only know you're good enough, you feel you are good enough too. So we don't get triggered by other people. We can allow other people to be unhappy around us. And the best thing, we don't end up in long-term relationships with narcissists and toxic people. So I hope that was really, really helpful, teaching you about codependency a little bit. I thought it was just related to alcohol, but boy, oh boy, does this make sense when you know it, right? So everything, all links in the show notes if you want to come and join my community. I hope this has been really educational for you. Remember, my podcast drop every single Tuesday. So if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit the bell and make sure you subscribe. And if you're listening to this on any of the podcast platforms, make sure you hit your reminders so you get notified. So take care, everybody. Keep looking after yourself. Remember, trauma does not have to be a life sentence. I'm living proof of all of that, but we are all still a work in progress. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you on the next episode.